Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us. People are logging in and we'll be starting in a few minutes. So take a few minutes to log in, get comfortable, and we'll begin at 1 o'clock. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. There's still a few more folks logging in and we'll get started in a few minutes. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're going to be starting in a few minutes. A few more folks are logging in, and we'll get started just about 1 o'clock. Right, we're going to begin in just about a minute, and that will let everyone have a chance to log on. Okay, it is just about 1 o'clock, our official start time, so I think we're ready to go. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar of family panelists sharing sharing personal experiences. We're excited that we have 3 panelists, that we're going to have lots of great information today. My name is Adel Hergy. I am a NTG member, and I am a member of the board of directors. I'm also the co-chair of the Quality Improvement and Analytics Committee. And I'm joined today by my colleagues, Marianne Barbera and Christine Yuen, and they will introduce themselves in a minute. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the NTG, NTG stands for National Task Group on Intellectual Disabilities and Dementia Practices. We are a national 501c3 nonprofit, and our mission is to advocate for services and supports for people with intellectual disabilities who are affected by Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and for their families. We do this through federal advocacy and producing materials related to dementia, including practice guidelines, screening tools, education and training curricula and workshops, agency and family-based information, and other technical materials, as well as provide some technical assistance. Before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll be able to share a link for you with you in a few days after this. So the recording will also be posted on the NTG website. Language translation is available for closed captioning. As a participant, you can self-enable captions and switch language by clicking on Show Captions, that little arrow at the bottom of your screen. We invite your comments and questions. Please take a look at the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you think of a question for the speaker at any point, just click that button and type your question in there, and we will hold it for discussion at the end of the event. Please don't put your questions in the chat box. We'll use the chat box for technology or technical related questions that do not relate to webinar content. We will not be using the raised hand feature today, so don't use that feature. Just type your question in the Q&A box and we'll be sure to get to it. At the conclusion of the at the conclusion of the webinar, there will be a brief survey that we'd like you to complete that gives us feedback about today's webinar and some information on future webinar series that we might be able to offer. The survey link and the QR code is on your screen, and we will show it again later after the webinar. So today's moderator is Marianne Barbera, and I'm going to turn this over to her. Marianne?
Thank you so much, Adel. I have had the honor and privilege of working collaboratively and closely with Adel for the past few years. Our work together includes the creation of an IRB-approved family survey, as well as the planning of this 5-part webinar series. Kathy Service, who has been co-moderator for the previous 4 webinars and is unable to join us today, is also a committee member who has been involved in both projects as well. She sends her regards to all of you and will miss being present for today's webinar. For those of you who attended our previous webinars on the process of aging, early screening for cognitive changes, life planning for different phases of the life journey, and behavioral changes that occur with aging and dementia, we welcome you back. For those of you that hadn't registered for those webinars, we welcome you today to our 5th webinar, which is the last webinar in this series. It is an honor and privilege to be part of today's webinar as moderator. Before I introduce today's speakers, let me tell you a little about myself and my involvement with NTG. In 2016, my beautiful beloved sister, who was an individual born with Down syndrome, started showing signs of cognitive decline. As I began my search for reputable resources and support to help guide me in learning more so I could provide the best care possible for her, I found myself unable to find the resources and support I so desperately wanted and needed. Over the course of the next several years, I did locate some helpful resources, but it wasn't until 2021 that I learned about NTG and the extremely valuable, reputable resources and monthly support group that they offer. I was so overwhelmed with gratitude for finding what I needed that I made a promise to myself in honor of my beloved sister that I would do my part to help minimize the likelihood that other families may experience the same difficulty in finding the information and support they need. As a result, I became part of NTG's Family Support Committee, was elected to become a member of the board, and eventually became chair of the Family Support Committee. I am also involved with a monthly virtual support group, assisting our facilitator, Kathy Service, and sharing my lived experience with the group members. With this involvement, myself and many other board members and committee members created an IRB-approved survey to ascertain what families felt they needed regarding aging and caring for their loved one with an intellectual disability. The results of this survey indicated a few key areas which helped us to create our very first family webinar series, which has been an ongoing collaborative effort from NTG's board members, committee members, and our Director of Operations. Today's session is the 5th part of the series. Additionally, I'd like to mention that this webinar series is able to be offered to you free of charge due to the generous donation from a family that wishes to remain anonymous. Today's presenters will be sharing their personal lived experiences, which may or may not be similar to what you or others may experience. It is for informational purposes only. So at this time, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you today's first speaker, Leon Murphy. Leon Murphy, APNBC, is the administrator for the statewide clinical outreach program for the elderly, SCOPE, for the RWJBH healthcare system. SCOPE is a New Jersey DMHAS grant-funded program that provides behavioral supports to those in long-term care who have dementia and/or mental illness. She is also the chairperson for the ARC of New Jersey's Mainstreaming Medical Care Advisory Board. Leon has her BSN from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and her MSN from Rutgers University. She is board certified by the ANA. Leon is the mother of a 50-year-old daughter who has Down syndrome. She is the founder and co-chair of the New Jersey Family Support Group for those who have IDD and dementia. She is a participant on the National DD Council Initiative for those who have IDD and/or aging. Leon is a member of the National Task Group on Intellectual Disabilities and Dementia. At this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenter, Leon Murphy.
Well, thank you, Marianne. No wonder I'm so tired. I'm listening to all those things that I'm currently doing. But the most important reason why I'm here today, I'm speaking as a mother of a daughter who's 50 years old, who has Down syndrome. And I have to tell you, next slide, her name is Michelle. And she was born as the third of her 3 girls who are 4 and 2 at the time she was born back in 1973. I was a young nurse. I was working obstetrics at the time, and I thought I had all the answers to everything, as we all do in our 20s. You know, I knew everything about everything. And if you have all your children before you're 30, everything will be just perfect. Well, surprise, along comes Michelle. Total shock, disbelief, unexpected. We had none of the testing, ultrasound, blood work, everything that is done today. So there was no preparation whatsoever. When I went for the genetic testing and screening with my husband, it was really kind of an ironic situation. because prior to working in obstetrics, I had worked at Children's Hospital in Boston, and I had sat on the genetic counseling team. And I thought I knew how it must feel. And now here we are, family on the other side of the table, hearing things we didn't want to hear. And we were told she may live to be 40. She may never. And the list went on and on and on. She may never walk. She may never be toilet trained. She will never read. And I thought, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Probably the best thing for Michelle was having her two sisters, because they were 4 and 2. So they were all, I decided I had a wonderful neighbor, and she took me to meet a friend of hers who also had a daughter with Down syndrome. And the daughter had a lot of medical issues. Fortunately, Michelle didn't have any. And what that family had done was completely change their whole lives, even though they had another son, to revolve around this daughter. And they had taken everything out of their beautiful dining room. The husband was a dentist, and they had created the bedroom for the daughter there, and everything was about the daughter. And I said, no, that's not going to work. The other two were here first. She's going to make it as one of 3. She's going to have to be independent, or she's not going to make it. And I think that was one of the best decisions I ever made. So we began looking for programs. There were no early intervention programs. We had to start early intervention programs. Then there was no transportation to early intervention programs. So I can remember carpooling and taking 3 or 4 other parents' children with me to the preschools and early intervention. Then we began working on mainstreaming. When I lived in New Jersey at that point, and we lived in Middletown, which is a very large community. And I went to see the special education classes, and where they were being held were in the basement of a library annex. And I was appalled. I was just absolutely appalled. I said, no, this isn't going to work. So we had to arrange for them to move into the generic schools. I wanted her to go to the school where her 2 sisters were. It was absolutely imperative to me. And then we wanted her to be able to be taken out of, they classified everybody. I mean, you're going to get a real focus on history here, either trainable or educable. That's how they were classified. And so she fortunately was what they considered educable. And so she was mainstreamed out into other classes for reading and artwork. So she had that normal interaction with other children. Then we moved on to vocational training. So that was another whole thing. They had like workshops set up at the junior high school level where they would sort blocks and put them in containers. I went to the county. I said, no, that's not going to work. She can do more than that. She needs to be developed into something else. And this was really groundbreaking back then, because they would take, students with mild intellectual disabilities, but never anyone with Down syndromes. And fortunately, they listened to me. They moved her into, they had a grocery store set up in a community near the school, and they trained her to work in the grocery store. They also taught her food prep. So then she moved on to the high school. And that's where we got involved with job coaches and employment. I think of it now, and I cannot believe I let my beautiful little daughter do some of the things, but everyone kept saying, no, you're a groundbreaker. You've got to encourage her. She can do this. So the Garden State Parkway, which is a major highway here in New Jersey, they have these big rest stops with all these different food places there that you can stop. You can get gas. You can go to, 4 or 5 different stops. So they had like an enclave with 4 or 5 of them, 4 or 5 students, and they would take them to the Garden State Parkway rest stop in the afternoon. And then they would work there doing various things. And then when their shift was over, she would then take a cab to a train station. And from the train station, she took the public bus I think of it now and I am like in disbelief. I had beepers, cell phones were just starting to come back then. We're talking the early 90s now. And I don't know how I let this all happen. She was perfectly capable. She was very happy about it all. But that was the beginning. So they did travel training. And then we can go to the next slide. She graduated from high school. So you'll see her there very proudly graduating with her classmates from a regular integrated high school. At that time, I had received a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to start healthcare services in the state of New Jersey. And by the time we got it, it took us about a year and a half to get it off the ground and get it staffed. We had 3 family practice physicians who had done their residency with people with developmental disabilities out of Rutgers. And we had a psychiatrist and we had some psychologists. As quickly as we saw what the healthcare needs were, we quickly learned what the mental health needs were. So we had to incorporate all those services. We began seeing many of the people we had known for years. I had worked with many of these families in so many different capacities, plus socially with Michelle joining, the Special Olympics and bowling and swimming and all of the dances, that we began noticing that they were aging prematurely in their 40s. So this is the early 90s. I want you to think about that. So most of the families would bring, their sons or daughters in and be complaining that they were becoming challenging and difficult. They were refusing to do things like button their coat, change their clothes. They would put their clothes on over their pajamas in the morning. And we said, no, we think it's more than that. We think it's definitely more than that. So we ruled out all the medical causes. Families had tremendous difficulty accepting the diagnosis of dementia. How could this be happening? Someone in their 40s, we worked and struggled so hard to get them gainfully employed in the community, travel trained, able to use a cell phone and computers. How can they be backsliding now? That's when research programs began recognizing the onset of early dementia in those with Down syndrome. Because I'm not going to go into it a lot because I think you've already heard it on all the other webinars, but with the amyloid plaque building up. But we didn't really know what the cause was. And it seemed like the higher functioning the individual, the more dramatic was the decline. So a new research project, which I was happy to see so many of you signing on and saying where you were from. I can't believe so many people from all over the United States and Canada are on today. And I know Irvine also is part of the same study as Columbia Presbyterian in New York. So we joined that when Michelle was 30. We joined the study. So she's been involved in the study for 20 years, and they've been following her for 20 years. To see, what happens. First, they thought it was hormones. Then the different amyloid and beta plaque was discovered, and they're still following her now. So they began to really study it. And I think all of you, if we have families on, should really consider joining one of the studies, as several of them spread throughout the United States. One of the really dramatic things was that Michelle had been part of a group of 8 individuals, all with Down syndrome, and the families all coordinated together. We did so many things together. We had gone through school together with all of them, Special Olympics, all the dances, the proms, everything you could think of, all the birthday parties. And one by one, they began really developing the dementia. Of the 8 friends, 4 of them have already passed. So Michelle lost 4 of her best friends. Right now, 2 others are experiencing dementia. One she used to work in a law office, filing, took public transportation, very, very well-educated and capable person. And only 2 are left so far that are not showing signs of dementia. It was very scary. It was scary for all the families. So I want you to remember the families, how much they have done to get them to this point, and then they watch them falling backwards. So we'll go to the next thing, the next slide, please. So having worked in this.
Leon, you've been muted.
In there. Okay, is that better now? Thank you.
Much
Thank you.
better.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry. So the family support group. So I knew a lot. I didn't really do a lot with that information except help the people that were coming to our ambulatory care center. But then all of a sudden, December 2018, a story appeared on the front page of the Asbury Park Press, our county newspaper. And it was a story of a sister who had been caring for her brother. And I think as the individuals age, we kind of lose touch with groups, and we kind of isolate ourselves. I would have to say that about the families. And because you're not obtaining the services, you're not going to the day programs, you're not going to the sheltered workshops. And the story was her brother began choking. She didn't realize he was in the throes of dementia. So she rushed him to the hospital where he was put on life support. She did not have guardianship. She didn't know what to do. She was just being hit with the diagnosis of dementia and that he wasn't really going to get any better. So I thought about it and I called the reporter for the newspaper. And I said, would you like to see something positive come from that heartbreaking story? And he said, I would. I said, okay, I have a friend and another friend, and we are going to start a family support group, because that sister had been saying she didn't know who to call. She didn't know who to talk to. She had no idea this was coming. And that's how the family support group came to be that I run now. We have over 100 families here in New Jersey, all with someone with Down syndrome and who is aging and who is developing dementia. It has been so remarkable. I have learned so much from the other families of what to do, how to get ready. So the first thing I had to do was determine guardianship. Hard to believe I was such an advocate for every family getting the guardianship, knowing what you should do, but it was hard for me to do. It was very hard for me to do. The process was very old that I had seen and participated in before with other families, where you actually had to take the individual to the court and they would declare the person incompetent in front of them. Now it was a simple process with letters and affidavits and letting other family members know, a lawyer appointed for her, a lawyer for us, and we took care of it. So that is one of the first things you have to do, because that's what happened to that poor sister. She didn't have guardianship, so she didn't have the right to discontinue the life support. And it went on to quite a battle with the ethicists at the hospital. You want to discuss end of life issues early. Fortunately or unfortunately, Michelle had seen her friends go through the process. She saw birthday parties being held for her friends who were on a feeding tube, who had no idea what was going on. So Michelle and I have had that discussion. She saw some friends wind up in a nursing home. So we've discussed feeding tubes. She doesn't want one. We've discussed, would she want to stay home or would she rather be in a nursing facility? She absolutely wants to stay home. And some of the other things that come along with it. It was not easy. It's much easier for me as a nurse practitioner to have a discussion with a patient than it is my own daughter. I have to tell you that. We also had to prepare for different needs for everyday living. The stairs, we lived in a house, big pool, all of that. We've moved to a one-level house. We've had the bathrooms fixed. Michelle, actually, her bathroom, excuse me, at the new house was a tub that she had to step into. The one we had in the master bath, you walked into the shower. So she requested that that be done for her. Her life expectancy is now 65 years old. And I originally, when they told me she would live to be 40, I said, okay, I'm in my 20s. I will be able to handle that. Now I realize I probably won't be here. So I have discussed it with her sisters. So there are her two sisters that we're still very close to, who live close by, on what to do when it's over. So it's very, very important that you have these discussions ahead of time before it's an emotional situation. Okay, Mary Ann, the next slide, please. So this is Michelle now. This is she in July, she will be celebrating 20 years of employment at Banana Republic. She is very proud of this. She thinks she runs the store. She helps them pick the clothes that are going to go on the models in the window. So she's very happy about that. She belongs to an art club. Uh-oh, I'm having some trouble here. Let me see. She belongs to an art club. She's a member of the Michael Jackson dancing troupe, and she performs at area events like at malls or a grand opening or anything like that. She attends the Monmouth County Park System program 2 days a week, which she enjoys. It's mostly recreational activities. And then the next slide continues where we are now. So here she is, busy with her family. This is my grandson's wedding. She has 2 sisters, 2 brothers-in-law, 4 nephews, 1 niece, 2 nieces-in-law, who she actually calls, these are the women my grandsons have married, her sisters. And she's happy she finally has the sisters that she's always wanted, which is really upsetting to my other daughters who are her real sisters, but Michelle has moved on to the younger group. And I think you can identify that, that she's moved on, she's with the younger group now. So that's our story. I will be glad at the end to answer any questions you may have. So thank you. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Leon, thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences. I would like to now introduce our second speaker, Hut Beal. Hut Holohan Beal resides in Amherst, Massachusetts with her husband and 24-year-old son. Hut grew up in northern New Jersey in a family of 9 children. She had 2 siblings with Down syndrome, an older brother, James, and a younger sister, Anne. She also had an uncle with Down syndrome. Her brother, James, resided in a community school in New Jersey. He passed away in 2011. Her sister, Anne, was a member of the Pathfinder Village community in New York for over 20 years until she passed in March 2020. Hut, along with the 2 of her siblings, shared the guardianship for Anne. Hut received a BA in history from Trinity College in Washington, D.C., and continued her studies at Columbia University, where she obtained a master's degree in library science. She has spent over 30 years working as a reference librarian for various financial institutions and an international consulting firm. Currently, she is a member of the development office at Mount Holyoke College, working as a research analyst, where she assists the college in the area of prospect research and prospect management. Hut is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Kennedy Willis Center on Down Syndrome of Pathfinder Village and is the secretary of the board. Hut is here today to share with you the journey she and her sisters took with her sister Anne after Anne's diagnosis of dementia. She considers it an honor to share their story with you. At this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenter, Hut Beal. Hut, right now you're muted, so we're unable to hear you.
Excuse me for that. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's really an honor for me to be here. My story is a little different than Leon's, as my sister was in a community for a good portion of her lifetime. But and I'm here to share with you that my journey with my 2 other siblings about how we cared for Annie. Next slide, Mary Ann. So I will go through our family background, which you heard. Annie's early stage, her symptoms and what our plan of action was for her different stages, the early stage of dementia, the middle stage, and her late stage, and then the conclusion. Next slide, Marianne. I am one of 9 siblings. I had 2 siblings, as you have heard, with Down syndrome. I also had an uncle with Down syndrome, but today my focus is on my sister Annie. And Annie lived in a community for individuals with Down syndrome. She first lived in a community in Connecticut, and she was there for 14 years, and then she was moved to Pathfinder Village in central New York. And this is a picture of Anne. And in the background, you can see that her artwork. She was very much an artist, but this was Annie's picture of her and her family and her sisters. Next slide, please, Marianne. At the age of 52, Annie started exhibiting some changes in behavior and cognitive function. And the staff at her community kind of alerted us to, they noticed that Anne was kind of having some difficulty remembering simple things like what day of the week was it, or she was kind of refusing to go to some activities. And the staff decided that it may be time to start just tracking Anne for memory loss and dementia. And they told us that they would track her, and it was in their experience that generally a person who has been diagnosed with who has a dementia diagnosis usually has, an 8-year journey from initial diagnosis to the end of life, and that there may be 1 or 2 declines along the way. And I have to say that they were incredibly spot on with giving us that background and kind of just alerting us to what this journey was going to look like. So we kind of had some idea for planning purposes. Next slide, please, Marianne. So as I said, Annie kind of like what made the her community, the nursing staff, the house managers, the people in her the Center for Self-Expression where Annie went for her day program, what kind of led them to think that Annie might be having some issues? They noticed she was having a hard time performing routine tasks. Like she would have breakfast, and then normally they would put, their dishes in the sink and the dishwasher, and Annie kind of was forgetting to do that. She was losing focus on things. She loved to go to a number of activities that were offered at Pathfinder Village, but she kind of refused. She sort of lost interest in that. And there were some outbursts of anger and frustration, which normally had never been seen in her personality. She had difficulty in transitions. And this was one of the first things we noticed. Normally, Anne would come home to either my house for a holiday or one of my sister's houses, the other 2 guardians. But it started getting to the point where we knew she didn't really like coming home anymore, and we couldn't quite put a finger on why. And for some of us, it was a little hard to figure out why would she want to stay, why wouldn't she want to be with family at the holiday? And she also would get agitated if there was a change in schedule. If someone said, now remember, Annie, you've got a dentist appointment on Wednesday, and then Wednesday would come, and they'd be like, no, you can't go to day program. You need to go to, the dentist appointment. She had a very, very hard time with that. So they started realizing that they really needed to give her prompts and a lot of reminders, of what her daily schedule was. And that seemed to help alleviate some of her anxiety and stress about that. Next slide, please, Marianne. So our plan of action, I know I said I'm one of 9 siblings, but 3 of us were named Anne's guardians. And my parents had a wonderful friend or Annie mentor when Anne was in school back in New Jersey when she was younger. There was a special education teacher who asked my parents what their long-term goal was for Anne. Had they thought about what happens if they were no longer alive, or if something happened to them, who was going to be taking care of Anne? And it was a pretty frank discussion. They said, well, yes, she's got 8 siblings, but do you really want to, are they ready and able and want to take Anne on as a, a guardian or as a responsibility? And so my parents and I, we talked about it, and the three sisters, we kind of stepped up to the plate and were made Anne's guardian in the mid 1990s, even before Annie had gone to Pathfinder. And it was great. We kind of all grew up with Annie. Annie was always with us, so it wasn't, it didn't seem like this was this huge responsibility. But when we learned that Anne was starting to have some memory issues, we decided that each one of us, each of the guardians, would take a certain responsibility. So I was the family liaison with my other siblings, just to kind of make them aware of what the community was seeing with Anne's change in her cognitive abilities. One of the guardians is a nurse practitioner, so she really was the point person to the nursing staff and the medical staff at Pathfinder Village. And then the other sister kind of was the community and residential liaison for the folks at Pathfinder. And we also decided to do a mode of, come up with a mode of communication, like who was going to do what. We didn't really feel like the people at Pathfinder or the nursing staff needs to call all 3 guardians. Let each one of us kind of be a point person. And also, how did they want to communicate? Did the community at Pathfinder want to talk to us? What's the best way? Phone call, text, email? We kind of just wanted to get that sort of established before anything, happened that we needed to a spur of moment or, yeah. Next slide, please. The other thing we also did was, besides the guardianship, which had been taken care of, we completed what is known as, in New York State, it's a MOLS form. It really was its healthcare proxy form. We had that all complete if we ever needed to invoke it in case Anne had to go to the hospital. I was the closest sibling to Anne in New York State, and I live in Massachusetts, so I was a 4-hour ride away. One of my other siblings, the other guardian, was in Atlanta at the time, and the other one was in Boston. So we kind of wanted to make sure that we had ducks in a row, that we didn't have to make a decision in a very emotional time. And at that point in time, Pathfinder was wonderful, and the Kennedy Willis Center was great, helping us talk about issues that we really didn't think we would need to talk about. Annie was the youngest sibling, so we were like, well, what do you mean end of life? Like life planning and end of life. What do you mean? What are we thinking? We really hadn't thought about, if Anne passed away, what we would want her funeral, to look like, or what she would want. And we also wanted to, we advised our siblings of what her diagnosis would be. So there were no surprises in that. We tried to keep as transparent communication going with the other siblings in the family as best we could. Next slide, please, Marianne. So in the mid stage where Anne, besides the memory piece that she was kind of exhibiting, as well as the not remembering simple tasks, she started to develop difficulty in mobility and difficulty in her depth perception, especially with stairs and steps. And when we had one of her yearly individual plans of service up at Pathfinder, one of the staff at the Center for Self-Expression, which is her day program, said that they noticed Annie was having difficulty getting off the bus into the center. She couldn't navigate the stairs, and they realized what was happening was Anne couldn't see the difference in the perception. So what they wound up doing was putting like different colored tape on the stairs, so Annie could easily kind of see, okay, this step is red, this step is green, and she could get down that way. She started to get more confused on things, which was very difficult for her, because she would be frustrated. She couldn't understand why. She couldn't understand the changes that were happening. And I think, and also on some level, it was also very frightening for her. She was also forgetting to chew and swallow things. So they started providing her with a one-on-one aid, just to kind of help her with eating. And she started requiring assistance with her eating. Yeah. Next slide, please, Marianne. So in the mid stage, and I'm going to say it was 2016. I may not have my years right, but anyway, we got a call from Pathfinder Village that Annie had aspirated and was going to be taken to the ER, at which point in time they suggested that we invoke the MOLS form, just, in case something happened and we couldn't get there, or that they just knew what our hopes and wishes for what we had wanted for Anne. And then we also noticed that we needed to have an increased communication with staff. Annie's changes were happening kind of rapidly. So again, we kind of created a triage list for medical and residential staff, meaning, first call, if it's medical, first call Guardian A, then if you can't get Guardian A, Guardian B and C, and kind of, and how to get a hold of us. And we sought advice from the residential staffs as the best way to communicate. At this point in time, Annie was having a very hard time being verbal. And so we wanted to keep up being in touch with her and being, is still a part of, her day-to-day, not day-to-day, but, not change the way we interacted with her. So they had suggested that we buy Anne an iPod and that we FaceTime with her, because that is the one thing I do remember. Annie would always recognize us. So we would take turns FaceTiming her. We noticed that medical visits sometimes caused her a lot of anxiety because she couldn't remember that she had a date to go to the eye doctor. So we thought it would probably be best to forgo medical visits if they were not necessary. No sense putting her through the trauma of going to a medical visit if she didn't need it. And also transporting her there was difficult because at this time she's now in a wheelchair. And so we just tried to make things as easy for Anne as possible. And at this point, they decided to have hospice come and evaluate her to kind of determine if they needed to be brought in or possibly not yet. Next slide, Mary Ann. So the late stage for Annie, she was no longer verbal. She was no longer ambulatory. She was in like a wheelchair that could tip back for her to make her comfortable. She did develop a number of UTIs. She did have a number of seizures, and she started aspirating things more frequently. Her sleep-wake cycle was interrupted at this stage. She definitely required one-on-one direct care for all aspects of living. She couldn't feed herself, and she communicated through verbal gestures. But I have to say, through all of us, the staff was really incredible caring for her and being in constant contact with all of us, for sure. Next slide, please, Mary Ann. So again, when Anne hit late stage, we increased communication with staff to support them and for them to support us. Again, we did a triage communication list for the medical and residential staff. We figured out again, and what was the best way to, connect with Anne. Again, we did not do any medical visits if they were not necessary. We, kept our family members abreast of Anne's decline. And we devised a schedule for family members to, FaceTime with Annie. We always maintained our, visits with Anne. We would always go up to see Anne, number of times a year. That never changed. We would go up and visit with her. We would take her out. And yeah, we would just, keep in touch with her that way. Next slide, please, Mary Ann. In December of 2019, myself and my two other sisters went up to see Anne for a holiday visit, and we had noticed that she had really had a significant decline. This, unfortunately, was our last visit with Annie. She had, in January of 2020, she had aspirated. She was taken to the ER, but we knew that her time was kind of coming to a close. And it was also, as you all know, it was when there was the COVID outbreak. So we did get notification in March that, Anne's time was probably coming to an end, but we could not due to COVID. Her community was under lockdown, so we couldn't visit with her, but the staff was wonderful. We get to see her and on FaceTime and that sort of thing. In late March, Annie passed away peacefully. My journey was really incredible. I had the support of so many people, not only my family, but the people that helped support Anne through her 59 years of life. I keep in touch with all of the staff members, her house manager, I'm very, very good friends with. And I'm just really very fortunate that, we met these amazing people during Annie's journey. Yeah.
Pat, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience with everybody. I would like to now introduce our third speaker, Sharon Truckee Miller. Sharon Truckee Miller is a family advocate and caregiver experienced in the needs of people with developmental disabilities and Alzheimer's. Sharon's experience in caring for her sister, Robin, gave her a direct understanding of the challenges caregivers face. She began forming caregiver support groups more than 6 years ago and maintains the goal of helping others. Sharon currently runs a support group through the Alzheimer's Association in Los Angeles for caregivers caring for someone with a developmental disability and dementia. She ran a family support group at a program in North Hollywood for 10 years. She spent 3 years on the State Alzheimer's Advisory Committee, bringing light to the needs of the aging, developmentally and intellectually disabled population. She is committed to sharing her experience and knowledge with other caregivers. At this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenter, Sharon Truckee Miller.
Okay, am I here? No.
We can see you now.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. And thank you to Leon and Hut. That was really wonderful. Could we start my slides, Marianne?
Sure.
Oh, thanks. So this is my sister's journey through Alzheimer's. Next one. This is me and Robin, the sisters. Next one. These are pictures just to give you an idea. Robin was born a twin. Her brother, Tony, when they were brought home from the hospital, my mother said, Robin is to be treated exactly the way Tony is to be treated. When Tony learned to read and write, Robin had to learn to read and write. When Tony learned to ride a two-wheel bicycle, Robin learned to ride a two-wheel bicycle. And she was just integrated into, there were a gang of us kids, cousins and family that hung out, and Robin was just one of the gang. She, down in the lower left-hand corner, some of you may have seen her. She was on a show called Glee, and she played Sue Sylvester's sister for about 5 shows. And so I'm gonna let Robin introduce herself. Could we have the next slide? This is a book done by a program, LA Goal in Culver City, and it's Aesop's Fables told and illustrated or retold and illustrated by artists with developmental disabilities. Next slide, please. These are Robin's pictures that she painted for the book, and this is her description of herself. My name is Robin Truckee and I have Down syndrome. I'm not really happy about that, but I don't let it get in my way. I'm not different from anyone else once you get to know me. I live in my own apartment with a roommate. I work at the bakery department of a supermarket. I'm an athlete, an artist, a musician, a student, a good friend, and a happy person. I always try to be helpful. I have a good life, and I'm very honored to be in this book. Robin and I were at the program one day, and she was looking at the book while I was in a meeting. And when I came out, she said to me, do you think I've changed? And I said, do you? And she said, yes, this isn't my story anymore. So I said, well, write a new story. And she did. Next slide, please. And her new story is, my name is Robin Trokey and I have Alzheimer's. I am not very happy about that at all. Everything I worked so hard to learn is being taken away from me. I can't dial the phone or tie my shoes. I can't remember how to dress myself or to write my name. I can't get on an escalator or step down a curb. I'm afraid to walk because I fall a lot. This is embarrassing and scary for me. I get confused, which I hate because being confused confuses me. My friends get mad at me when I say the same things over and over again or call them by the wrong name, which I do all the time. It makes me feel like they don't like me anymore. My days are hard. My days are hard for me, but my nights are really bad. I get very scared. I don't like the dark because I see things that I'm afraid will get me. I am lost. I am trying very hard to find my way, but it's too hard. I need hugs. I need to know that someone is there for me because I don't want to be in this scary place alone. Next slide, please. Okay, Robin, in the early stages, Robin looked just fine. The first things we noticed were changes in her speech. She'd started having trouble at work, which she worked there for 17 years and never had any trouble. She started falling, just walking across the room and bam, she was falling and then becoming emotional. So we found reasons for this. Okay, the falling, the staff said, well, she's attention seeking, which didn't seem to make sense. The becoming emotional, we said, oh, it's menopause, you know, all of these things. And then I personally held her accountable. The changes in her speech, I said, Robin, come on, you've got to pay attention, speak clearly. Trouble at work, come on, Robin, you got to get in there, you got to do your, you know, I was making her responsible for things that she could have no control over, which looking back, that was a hard time for me to understand. Once I understood what was going on, she began misplacing things, forgetting things. She would appear to be lost or confused. She would be repeating questions and statements. Her short-term memory started showing difficulty, had some trouble following directions, which would, you know, go back into why she had trouble at work. She had difficulty completing tasks, which is why she started having trouble at work. And then what started causing problems was she became very irritable and resistant to a lot of things. And her staff at her program at that time started what I called the "we didn't sign on for this" campaign. And this to me is when, this is 16 years ago when we had no information. I had no information about any of this. The staff had no information, and they just thought Robin was being difficult. And it just is an indicator of how important it is for staff in programs to be trained in understanding this. Next slide, please. This is moving into middle stage. And there's this bleed through. There's like late, early, middle. I'm just kind of doing a quick overview here. This is where she really began having difficulty with dressing herself, using the phone. I found that this is where I needed to start getting really creative and finding the big phones where I could put a picture of myself and all she had to do was touch the picture to get through to me. She became more and more confused and forgetful. She was unable to do her daily tasks, needing a lot more assistance. Definitely couldn't remember people's names. She would get lost in familiar places. And she would get agitated and have these verbal outbursts. And the three main ones were, shut up, Stoopy, get out, and snow means snow. And at this time, keep moving here. She became very easily frustrated, totally afraid of stairs and curbs, very unsteady with walking. She needed a lot of reassurance. She was more comfortable being in quiet places. She started to have difficulty eating and choking. At one point, a piece of chicken got stuck in her throat and she had to go to the ER. So we had to start chopping food up, and little traces of anxiety, big traces of anxiety. She reached a point where she couldn't leave her room, and then she started seeing things in the dark. And at one point, every light had to be on. And this is when medication became an issue. And I am not an advocate of medication, but when things got so bad for her, I had to get over myself and do what was best for Robin. And her process through this disease, the theme of it would be, and then it got worse, and then it got worse, and then it got worse. And I would think, oh, wow, it can't get any worse than this. And yeah, it did. Could we have the next slide, please, Marianne? So when she got into late stage, when she stopped walking, and I have to say, we had the ideal situation. I was able to retire from work. I was able to bring her to my home. I thought she would be with me for about 6 months, and she was with me for 7 years. And her Alzheimer's process went from 50 to 63. So she had quite a long decline there. So by the time we were in late stage, at this point, she is unable to walk. She's unable to talk. She's lost all mobility. She couldn't pick something up, couldn't make an intentional movement. Her food had to be pureed. She was incontinent. She was fully dependent on me and her caregiver. She also needed the tilting wheelchair. She was on oxygen. We were always checking her breathing levels to make sure her oxygen levels didn't drop. And there were many medical issues that came up, like bed sores, pneumonia. Robin had myoclonic seizures, which are jerks. And we didn't medicate those because they weren't going to have any, she wasn't going to fall because of them. She wasn't going to get hurt because of them. And then she would get UTIs. Robin had a catheter. She had an indwelling Foley because her bladder stopped working. So there were many things that came up around that. Could we do the next slide, please? So some of the problems that we encountered, medical things. I said Robin needed medication, and I am so grateful to have found the clinic at UC Irvine. If anyone is in Southern California, the clinic at UC Irvine, you need to know about it. And Eric Doran. Eric, I said to Eric, you're going to be my best friend. I had Eric on speed dial. And when Robin needed medication, I called Eric, and he said, the best thing to do is get the lowest dose possible and half it. And the first drug Robin needed was for the anxiety. And I got the smallest dose, I halved it, and it turned out to be 1/4 milligram. And that's all she needed for a long time. That was fine. And when she had to be titrated up, instead of making it the 1/2 milligram, we did 1/4 milligram in the morning and 1/4 milligram in the afternoon. So it never knocked her out. However, when I would go to doctors and I would say, oh, she's on 0.05 milligrams of Ativan, the doctor would say, you need to double that right away. Now, why, if that dose is working for her, would I double it? Same thing, she was put on Seroquel for seeing things because she would get so terrified. She was on the lowest possible dose of Seroquel. And again, a doctor said, you need to double that as soon as you get home. And could never understand if the dose she was on was working, why would I want to double it? And yet the medical community always wanted to give her more medication. And when she was on hospice, I actually had to fight with the hospice doctor to keep the medications low because they really wanted to up them, especially the prednisone, which she was on 10 milligrams of prednisone for her breathing, and they upped it to 20, and she just became like wild movements, and they said, no, prednisone doesn't do that. She's having seizures. I knew they weren't seizures. So there were things to deal with the medical community, and other things like with her catheter, the doctor said she'll have to go into the hospital once a month and have her catheter changed under general anesthesia. Now, someone with a brain dysfunction going under general anesthesia once a month didn't sound like a good idea to me. And I said to him, would you do that to me? And that became my question. Would you do that to me? And when he said no, I found a different urologist who was able to change the catheter with kindness. And it became important to really look for the right medical people who could meet the needs. And fortunately, I was able to find the right people. As far as caregivers, when Robin moved into my house, I had a caregiver who would come during the day. 3 of the women in this picture are the best caregivers ever. And the one caregiver brought her 2 children over. These women were amazing. They treated Robin like family. They would sing to her. They would sit and read with her. They'd get her cleaned up and dressed every morning and out into the community. It was amazing. But finding these 3, I had to go through about 15 caregivers. And there really is a lack of training in many instances. Caregivers who didn't know how to change diapers, didn't know how to change sheets if they had gotten soiled while Robin was still in the bed. And there was this lack of understanding. Many of them who came in thought that what their job was to feed Robin lunch and then to sit on the couch and play games on their phone for the rest of the day. And even when I would suggest reading to her or getting her up or doing things, they weren't really interested. So I am such an advocate of getting caregivers trained. And I am so grateful to these 3 women. Robin died 4 years ago. I'm still in touch with all of them. And what we talk about and what they will say is they miss everyone being together. They miss the fun we had. Next slide, please. Because I was determined that this was not going to be a sad time for me or a sad time for Robin, that we were going to keep her life as normal as possible. And what worked for us, I found out Robin's catheter started smelling, and it was really a problem. And I called the doctor to see what I should do. And the doctor said, not my problem. So I had to figure out what to do. Turns out that she needed to drink 8 glasses of water a day. And that completely got rid of the smell. We kept her diet clean. At this point, she was on a puree diet. We kept fruits and vegetables, chicken and fish. We eliminated sugar except for some ice cream periodically because she loved going to Menchie's for ice cream. We seriously limited the starches. Everything was pureed, and we tried to keep everything as fresh as possible whenever we could. Next slide, Marianne, please. We made sure that she was active. At this point, when she couldn't really walk or move or do anything, I found this little exercycle that you plug in and it pedals, and we would tie her feet to the pedals, and it would help with her circulation, her muscle strength, her joint movement, and it kept oxygen flowing so that there was more oxygen getting to her brain and she could sit in the wheelchair. I got one of these for one of the people in my group one time, and she sent me a picture of her sister sound asleep in the wheelchair, pedaling away on the exercycle. So this was really a wonderful thing to have. Next slide, please. I kept her connected to her friends. Anytime there was something going on, I would get Robin and the caregivers and we would go and we would participate. If she had a birthday, we'd bring them to the house so that, or take her there so that she was always with her friends, even very close to the end. Next slide, please. We did, I call it couch time. When someone is in a wheelchair or a hospital bed, it's hard for hugs and cuddles and just close time. So if it wasn't me, it was one of the caregivers, and we would do couch time with Robin so that she had the closeness of someone being there with her. Next slide, please. We kept her active and out in the community. Rob loved being out doing things, and we kept her out doing things. I wanted this slide in especially because when she got so agitated and she'd say, "You get out," friends of mine would come to my door and say, "Can I come in so Robin can tell me to get out?" So I had hats made for the caregivers, for myself. We all had get out hats to wear when we were around Robin, and it just made it more fun. Next slide, please. We kept her busy with fun, fresh air. I found a place where they had beach wheelchairs and you could get the beach wheelchair for free. So we would take Robin out to the beach and we would run and just have a good time and spend time with her doing things that I know she loved doing. Next slide, please. This was Robin's last Halloween. And because she was out rolling in the neighborhood so much, everybody knew who Robin was. And for Halloween, her caregiver and one of her friends came dressed as the Cat in the Hat and something else. And Robin loved trick-or-treating. So they took her out trick-or-treating. And Robin is dressed as an angel and her wheelchair is decorated like heaven. So we really tried to keep things going for her. And I always believed that even though it looked like the lights were out, I knew she was home. I knew she was in there. And I knew she liked doing the stuff that we were doing. So we kept doing it. And next slide, please. So as a caregiver, I had all these emotions. There was confusion, frustration, aggravation, sadness, heartbreak. Watching all the stuff happening to Robin just broke my heart. And I had been grieving for years, just watching her disappear. The fear of what was coming next and how was I going to handle it? Panic. When things would get bad, I would panic, and then desperation. And I got her on hospice because the desperation was too much for me. And I didn't want to have to call 911 because I was her nighttime caregiver. And, things that are going to happen always happen at 3 a.m. They don't happen in the afternoon, they happen at 3 a.m. And I thought, I don't want to call 911. I don't want her on a feeding tube. I don't want her breathing on a machine. So I got her on hospice, and Rob was actually on hospice for 3 years. And it helped me, it helped her to get the extra care, and it helped me because I didn't have to go in that desperate place of not knowing what to do. I knew to call the hospice. Next slide, please. Oh, and I forgot to put guilt up there. Oh my gosh, there was so much guilt. I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a physical therapist, I wasn't a nutritionist, I didn't know what to do. So much guilt about things. But what I also experienced was support, friendship, caring, and love. These are two of Robin's friends who we were out at events, and they just wanted to be with her and wheel her around and be with her. And those are two of my friends who helped us throughout the whole thing. And they brought kindness and happiness and fun and patience and understanding, and just so much love was present during this whole time. And every time something bad happened, there would be a silver lining connected to it. And I kept my focus on the silver linings. Next slide, please. It was important as a caregiver that I understand that Robin did not see the world the same way I did. And what I saw as normal was very confusing and threatening to her. And I couldn't expect her to enter my reality. I had to be there with her in hers. And I needed to be patient, supportive, and understanding, knowing that she was lost and couldn't find her way back. And I had to change because she couldn't. Next slide, please. So support groups became essential. This is a Alzheimer's Orange County has a support group. Our Alzheimer's Los Angeles has a support group. The information from UC Irvine was beyond helpful. NTG has a national support group and a Facebook page, and the Down Syndrome Society, NTG, and the Alzheimer's Association. Mary Ann's probably going to put up a picture of this, but this is a book about Down syndrome and Alzheimer's, and it has so much valuable information in it. And I wish I had had that when we started our journey. Next slide. That's about my support group. And next slide is, oh, that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
Sharon, was there something else that you wanted to include in after your last slide?
Oh, no, I just thought there might be another slide. Sorry.
Okay, no problem at all. And thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing your personal experience. And thank you again to all three of today's presenters who have shared with us their personal lived experiences and very powerful stories. At this point, we will begin to take participants' questions. Throughout the entire webinar, Adel Hergy and Christine Nugent have been monitoring the Q&A and chat. Remember, if you have a question that you have not yet submitted, please enter it into the Q&A and we will get through as many questions as time allows. We will now begin to read and respond to questions that haven't already been answered. And if you want the question directed specifically to one of our speakers, please indicate that. Otherwise, we will welcome all three speakers to respond. And all speakers, please feel free to turn on your camera as well as your microphone.
Thank you, panelists, for sharing your stories. We have quite a number of comments of thank you for sharing your personal stories. A number of comments come up around the issue of guardianship being very expensive or very challenging. I don't know which of the panelists would like to talk about that. Was it very expensive? Was the Leon, you said it was kind of challenging. So yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So we had it done fairly recently, about 3 years ago, to be honest. I was very late to the party, and it did cost $5,000. We did go to an attorney who was an elder law specialist who had worked with other families that I knew, and she kind of took care of it. But that was like the total cost, including everything. I do know some families who have done it for much less, for about $1,200 or $1,500, and they do all the paperwork themselves, take it to the court, deliver it rather than having the attorney do it. Also in New Jersey, we have the Community Health Law Project here, and they will take on individuals, families who are trying to get guardianship, and they will do the process for nothing, but there is quite a waiting list for that. So I would imagine other states have something similar to that as well.
Here in California, we have, in Southern California, we have Betzetic. And I was able to do Robin's, well, I did a conservatorship and it cost $400. And they do a clinic where you go in and they assist with the paperwork, and it's very helpful.
Wow,
Vetsetic.
wow. Wow.
Thank you. It sounds like there's a range and it sounds like there's a number
Right.
of ways to seek guardianship. So thank you for that. There's a question here directly for HUD. HUD, could you tell us a little bit more about the, I'm going to spell it, MOLST form?
Hold on. Yeah, I'm happy to. It is a medical required form from the state of New York. It's been a while, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but in the state of New York, it replaces a healthcare proxy. And so all three guardians needed to sign, the form, and it had directives, medical directives, such as, if your sister gets brought to the hospital, do you want her incubated? What processes do you not want her to do? So we kind of had that all filled out, signed, and it lived at Pathfinder Village in her medical record. And then when we were advised by the medical staff that since she kind of started aspirating things, that it might be best if we invoke it, we literally had to have a conversation. All the three guardians each had to have individual conversations with the medical director to say, yes, we are on board, you can invoke it. And that's when he signed off on it. So in the state of New York, I believe it takes the place of a healthcare proxy.
Yeah, Adel, I could elaborate a little bit more on that. It's different in every state. It's called a different name. So here in New Jersey, it's called POLST, POLST, and it's practitioner's orders for life-sustaining treatment. But every state in the United States does have this form, and it's a different color in certain states. It's quite unique. And you complete it saying, do you want the individual to receive antibiotics? Do you want the individual to receive intravenous? I mean, not only just, the respirators and ventilators and all that, but it goes into the feeding tube. And it's a great form to do ahead of time. Again, you don't want to wait until someone's having an episode and you're in the emergency room and you're trying to figure out what to do. So, and it's signed by, here in New Jersey, we can have a nurse practitioner or a medical doctor sign it, as well as the guardian.
Thank you. Hopefully that answered that question. We have another question. This could be for any of the panelists or all of you. How have you coped with chronic grief and loss that persists after the passing of your loved one?
I'll go if that's okay. It hits at different times. And what was hard for our family was that Anne passed away in the height of COVID, where, everything was on lockdown. COVID was new. We didn't know, you had to wash your hands all 5 minutes, that sort of thing. So unfortunately, we had hoped to have her, a memorial service for her at Pathfinder, and my entire family was going to come up. That could not happen. Because for the community at Pathfinder, they were grieving for her, but to keep delaying doing a memorial service for her was very hard on the other residents. So we had given them permission to kind of, host a memorial for Anne, and they were really caring for us. They had made us butterflies, and they sent us this beautiful box, and people had written, things about Annie on the butterflies. For my family and I, we literally had a very small service. Just my husband, I, and son were at Anne's when her ashes were interned. But then as a family, we did a Zoom call because that's what we had to do in the height of COVID. And I was trying to figure out how to put this together. And there was it was a miracle because we were having work done on our house. We had to get up to the attic and take some things out, boxes down. In the boxes, I found all these slides of Annie when she was like when she was little. And I created a slideshow and we kind of did it for the Zoom memorial I have with my family. And it was amazing because there were Annie, when she was like 2 or 3, she was an incredible swimmer. And so to have that up, my older siblings, that's like, they remember that Annie, you know, because there's a pretty big age span in my family, like about 15 years. So they remember Annie at that stage. So it was really very moving. And I think I am part of Pathfinder still, where she spent all of her time, because I'm part of Kennedy Willis. So just remembering her and getting together with my siblings and stuff and talking about her, I don't know. I think maybe allows ourselves to remember, hopefully in a positive way. And it really wasn't until I was asked to present today that when I went through all of the records I had to kind of be like, oh my God, oh yeah, on something. So I don't know if that's helpful for all. I mean, Sharon, please feel free.
Okay, I'm going to weigh in. Robin died just before the pandemic. So we had her funeral and I went right into quarantine. One of the things that I did while Robin was still alive, I had to stop comparing. You know, I would say, oh, Robin used to be able to tie her shoes. Oh, Robin used to be able to do this. So I had to just stop comparing her to who she was and be present with her, who she was at that time. And when I was preparing for, and I got good at that. I got good at just seeing Robin where she was and being with her. And when I put together the slides for her funeral, and I went back to see the vibrant person she was, it really was very difficult. And yet at the same time, it was wonderful. And my mother told us Robin was only going to live to be around 20. So I had 43 extra years with her. And I try to focus on that. And I talk about my grief. I was part of a bereavement group. And in our support group, and some of the support group people are here today. It's nice that they're here. I will talk about everything that happened. And it's just being able to share with others is so important to me. Thank you.
Thank you. There's also a question about, did you discuss with your family member about their Alzheimer's disease in the early stages?
Oh, with Robin, I did. We had very big discussions about that because she was aware of what was going on. I remember when Eric Doran at UC Irvine said Robin was one of the first people who could put a narrative to everything that was going on. And it was really important to discuss this with her. We discussed burial things. We donated Robin's brain to research of course, after her death. That only makes sense. But you know, we talked about a lot of stuff with her, and you know, of course, so much of it went away, but we did discuss things, her burial, everything. She picked out her casket. She told me what she was part of everything.
We did have conversations with Anne, but some of it resonated, some of we didn't have deep conversations with her about it. She was aware of what was going on in the sense that she was aware that she was starting to change and being forgetful, but not understanding that it was Alzheimer's or dementia. No.
And I have to say, I had a hard time understanding what was going on. So I'm sure Robin had a hard time understanding what was going on. But we did talk about it.
Oh, at this moment in time, I'm sorry to say that we don't have additional time left for the many questions that you have. This has been just an amazing webinar with so much personal information that is valuable, I'm sure, to everyone that has attended. And I know for myself, a lot of this resonates with me for the experiences I've had. Again, if there's any questions that were unanswered, we will do our best to have them answered and email the responses to everyone. And if there's additional questions that you'd like to submit, by all means, please do so now. What I would like to do is just share a few resources and slides about the NTG, some that were mentioned previously. Before I do that, I just want to show the family support email address at NTG in case anybody wishes to contact us directly. And again, if you don't have enough time to screenshot this while it's being displayed, it'll be in the recording and it'll also be on our website. So you're welcome to locate and contact us at that through that method. So the NTG does have many family resources available. Sharon showed up one booklet that we post on our website that NDSS prepared, and NTG was a part of preparation as well. And there's many other resources, and they're all reputable. So it's not just somebody who you don't know that's making something up. It's something that can be trusted and worth looking at. And the resources are then continued here. Again, different snapshots. The link is on your screen. And again, if you go to the NTG website, you'll be able to access all of that information. In addition to the resources that are there, Sharon did mention this, and I mentioned initially when I started the webinar that NTG does have a monthly support group. It's virtual. It occurs the first Thursday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Kathy Service, who's very active and is the secretary of the NTG, is our facilitator, and I join in with her to share my lived experiences, and we provide support to anyone that would wish to join in. And again, if you don't have enough time to catch the link here, it is on our website. This is the QR code and link to the survey to provide your feedback specific to today's webinar. We definitely encourage the feedback that helps us to prepare things for the future so that we can customize things that meet your needs. And again, I would like to thank Leon Hutt and Sharon for sharing their personal experiences, and also for the co-hosts and moderators, Adel Hergy and Christine Nugent, for their assistance with today's webinar. Again, if you could take a moment to complete the survey, that would be greatly appreciated. And on the very next slide, once again, is the family support email address, as well as the NTG website address. I'm going to go back to the QR code in case anybody wishes to take another moment to hold their phone up to that to be able to respond to our survey. And I thank everyone who's joined us, and please feel free to contact us at any time. And we hope that the webinars have been informative and helpful for all of you. The recording will be coming out soon, as well as the one-pager that accompanies it. And again, any questions that we're able to answer in a document that haven't been answered online, we will definitely share with all registrants. We hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and please be on the lookout for information for future webinars that may be offered as well. Panelists and hosts, upon exiting the webinar, please remember to log into Zoom using the link previously sent to you for a quick debriefing. And we thank you so very much for your time. Okay.